Well, I want to talk about a little grab bag of topics as we wrap up the New Deal in America. And one of them, the first of them, is labor's ascendancy. In 1935, John Lewis of the United Mine Workers, we've already mentioned him, and another union man, Sidney Hillman, president of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, they led their unions and 6 others to secede from the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, that of course had been founded and become very powerful under Samuel Gompers. They seceded from that and created their own new umbrella union organization called the CIO, the Committee for Industrial Organization. And they aspired to organize millions of new non-union workers that would strengthen labor's position in politics. In 1936, Lewis and Hillman also created something called the Labor Nonpartisan League, sort of a lobbying arm to develop a labor strategy for the 1936 election. And it openly channeled money and energy into FDR's reelection campaign. FDR welcomed the help, and labor thus became an important element in the new Democratic coalition, this Roosevelt coalition I spoke of last time. And in late 1936, an important strike also drew attention to labor's rising power. The UAW, United Auto Workers, took on GM, which was considered the most powerful corporation in the world. They occupied key factories in Flint, Michigan, and conducted a sit-down strike that would continue until GM acknowledged the UAW and bargained with them. What historically American companies had done was call on a friendly governor to call out the National Guard, but Frank Murphy, who was the governor of Michigan, refused to use the National Guard. And FDR, of course, refused to send federal troops, and GM broke. The union won the strike. This Frank Murphy, by the way, he was later appointed a associate Supreme Court justice by FDR, and before he was governor, he was the last of Michigan. He was the last governor general of the Philippines. Labor's stature, its perception in American society, grew along with its size. WPA writers and artists depicted labor as the voice of the people, sort of glorified it. Murals in public buildings sprang up that showed portraits of blue-collar Americans at work. Movies and plays with a worker theme prospered. The Grapes of Wrath is probably the best-known example of really a whole body of literature that celebrated the decency and honesty of hard-working, ordinary Americans. Now, between 1937 and 38, the New Deal had begun to lose momentum. One reason was a growing split between the working class and the middle-class Democrats. After the UAW's success against GM, other unions began to use sit-down strikes, and middle-class Americans began to have their usual concern about labor's growing power, the concern for social order. And into this scenario entered something called, it's known as the court-packing scheme, that was really a low point, a political low point for FDR. FDR proposed a plan in 1937 that would require constitutional changes, obviously, that would allow him to alter the Supreme Court. And this particularly disturbed the middle class. He asked to be able to appoint one new Supreme Court justice for every member of the court over the age of 70 and who had served at least 10 years. He claimed they were too feeble to handle the cases before them. But his real reason was to prevent this conservative court from dismantling the New Deal. FDR had not minded in 1935 when they declared the NRA unconstitutional. It had already failed anyway, but he did not want to see the Wagner Act or the Social Security Act invalidated. His proposal would have given him the authority to appoint 6 additional justices, securing a clear pro-New Deal majority. And his willingness to tamper with something Americans regarded as sacred was really remarkable. His political savvy was apparently dulled by his overwhelming 1936 victory, and his inflated sense of power angered a lot of former New Deal supporters. Many middle-class supporters left him, although most of the working class remained loyal. And so in 1937 and 1938, a working opposition to FDR emerged. Republicans, obviously, a number of conservative Democrats, most of them Southerners, and civil libertarians who were concerned about how much power he was arrogating to the federal government and to the executive branch particularly. And ultimately, his scheme to pack the court was unnecessary. In March of 1937, Justice Roberts reversed himself. So the court was headed by Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes. This was the very famous man who was a Supreme Court justice, and he was governor of New York, and then he left the court to run against on the Republican ticket against Woodrow Wilson in 1916, almost won. Very distinguished Secretary of State under under Harding, then Coolidge, and then he was appointed to the Supreme Court as Chief Justice. And he was kind of in the middle. And then on the on one extreme, we had these four very conservative justices called the Four Horsemen, I guess in reference to the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Justices Van Devanter, McReynolds, Sutherland, and Butler. They opposed New Deal themed sort of ideas and schemes. And Justice Roberts voted with them. And so they would usually, they had a 5-4 majority over Justice Hughes in the middle and the more liberal justices, Cardozo, Stone, and Brandeis. But then in March of 37, as I said, Justice Roberts reversed himself. He actually began to support the more liberal justices with Justice Hughes. And as a result, the Wagner Act and the Social Security Act were upheld in 5-4 votes. And then within 3 years, 5 justices retired, allowing FDR to name their replacements. Still, FDR's reputation suffered somewhat from the court packing scheme. A sharp recession struck the country in late 1937 and 38, compounding FDR's political problems from the court packing scheme. The New Deal programs of 1935 stimulated the economy. In 1937, production surpassed the highest level of 1929, so GDP had climbed above pre-Depression levels. Unemployment fell to 14%, still high, but much better than the worst days. So FDR began to logically scale back some relief programs. At the same time as he was scaling back some of the fiscal stimulus, new payroll taxes took $2 billion from people's salaries to finance Social Security. The first Social Security payments were not scheduled to begin until 1941. So he's cutting back on the relief. Or the SSA is automatically sucking more money out. And once again, the economy became starved. Stock market crashed, losing 40% in October from its August high. In March of 38, unemployment soared to 20%. FDR suffered in the 1938 midterm elections. But the New Deal was not dismantled. However, no new programs emerged.